السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So this is our third lesson inshallah ta'ala on the ahkam and the adab of Ramadan and fasting. And in the first lesson we looked at some of the key etiquettes and sunnah of Ramadan and fasting. And in the second lesson we mainly focused on the things that are considered to be invalidators of the fast. And today inshallah ta'ala we'll briefly have a look at the night prayer in general and Salat al-Taraweeh specifically, and some of the ahkam relating to Etiquette and things relating to that inshallah ta'ala. Now, first of all, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also I forgot to add also some of the recommended fasts and the sunnah that relate to the sunnah of fasting. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was described as fasting so much that it was as though he always fasted, and he would break his fast so much that it was as though he never fasted. So that shows that the Prophet ﷺ was balanced with his fast. Sometimes he would fast and sometimes he wouldn't. And this is why when the Prophet ﷺ was told about Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As and how he prays all night and fasts during the day and recites the Quran every day. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, I am told that you're doing this and this and this. Is that true? He said, yes, O Messenger of Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, recite the Quran once a month. So every day, recite one juz' and complete the Quran in a month. Don't recite the whole Quran in one day. And he told him, fast 3 days a month. Fast 3 days a month. Every month you fast 3 days. And fasting 3 days a month is a sunnah. Full stop. Yeah, it's a sunnah, full stop. Meaning, it's not specific or it's not restricted to the 3 white days, what are known as the white days. Yeah? Or the days of the 3 white nights. It's not specific to them. Meaning, if you were to fast in Muharram, for instance, the 1st of Muharram, and the 3rd of Muharram, and the 8th of Muharram, you've achieved the sunnah. And if you fast in Rabi' al-Awwal, the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd, you've achieved the sunnah of fasting 3 days a month. But if you fast the 3 middle days, the 3 what are known as the white days, the 13th, 14th and 15th, then that's even better. Okay? And why are they called the white days? We mentioned why previously. Yes, because the moon is at its fullest at that time. And we said the moon goes through phases on a monthly basis. It goes through phases. And in the middle of the month, of the Hijri month, the moon is at its fullest. And so if you see a full moon, you know it's the middle of the month. Either 13, 14, 15, roughly that time. So it's recommended to fast those 3 days. Now, Abdullah said to the Prophet ﷺ, I can do more than 3 days. 3 days a month is easy. So he said, then fast 1 day and break your fast 1 day. Fast 1 day and break 1 day. So he said to him, I can do more than that. He said to him, there is no better than that. That's the fast of Dawood. That's the fast of Dawood alayhi salam, and there is no better fast than that. And when he got older, radiallahu anhu, he no longer was able to fast as much as he used to fast. So he would say, I wish I took with the rukhsa of the Prophet ﷺ. I wish I took the Prophet ﷺ's advice. I wish I took the Prophet ﷺ's advice in not overdoing it. Not overdoing it. And this is why in the other hadith the Prophet ﷺ says, Inna ad-deena yusr. This religion is easy. وَلَن يُشَادَّ الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. And anyone who tries to outdo the religion more than what's recommended, more than what is established, إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. You'll be overcome. You'll be too much eventually. And this is why things have to be taken in steps and with ease. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ was described in that manner, alayhi salatu wassalam. And the 3 white days are which days? 13, 14, 15. 13, 14, 15. Every month it is recommended to fast the 13th, 14th and 15th of that month. Okay? But of course, like we said, you can fast any days of the month. What's the reward for fasting 3 days a month? The Prophet ﷺ said, كَانَ كَالصِّيَامِ الدَّهْرِ. It's as though you fasted for a lifetime. Why? Because every good deed is multiplied by how much? 10. That's the general rule. The Prophet ﷺ explicitly told us this. Every good deed is multiplied by 10. So if you fast 3 days, then it's as though you fasted a whole month, 30 days. And if you're fasting a whole month every month, then it's as though you're fasting a whole year. And if you're doing that consistently, then it's as though you fasted for a whole lifetime. Yeah? And so fasting 3 days a month is rewarded in that manner, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. However, there are 2 months in the year in which it's not recommended to fast these 3 days. There are 2 months in the year in which it's not recommended to fast these 3 days. What are those 2 months? Dhul Hijjah. Why? Nah, good. That's the first one. The first is Dhul Hijjah. Because in Dhul Hijjah, on which day is Eid al-Adha? On which day is Eid al-Adha of Dhul Hijjah? The 10th. What's the day before it? Arafah. The day of Arafah is the day before it. That's the 9th. Eid al-Adha is on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. Now, that's the day of Eid. But then we have 3 other days after that known as Ayyam al-Tashriq. Ayyam al-Tashriq. And the Prophet ﷺ said, or made these days of eating and drinking and remembering Allah as a continuation for the day of Eid. As a continuation for the day of Eid. And that's why Aisha radiallahu anha says, like reported by Muslim, she said, لَمْ يُرَخَّصْ فِي أَيَّامِ التَّشْرِيقِ أَنْ يُصَمْنَا. There is no fasting in the 3 days of Tashriq, the 11th, 12th and 13th of Dhul Hijjah, except for the one, إِلَّا لِمَنْ لَمْ يَجْدِ الْهَدِي, except for the one who doesn't find a sacrifice during Hajj. He then fasts 3 days at Hajj and 10 when he returns to his family. But the point is, it's prohibited to fast these 3 days. According to the Hanabila and many other scholars, it's not permissible to fast the 11th of Dhul Hijjah, or the 12th of Dhul Hijjah, or the 13th of Dhul Hijjah. Even though the 13th of Dhul Hijjah is the first day of the 3 white days. But that's the exception. That's the first exception. But it's still mustahab to fast the 14th and 15th, even in Dhul Hijjah. What's the second month in which it's not recommended to fast the 3 white days? You know the answer. Ish? Ramadan. That's it. Because in Ramadan it's wajib. In Ramadan, fasting the 3 days, those 3 days is wajib. Not because they're 3 white days, but obviously because they're part of Ramadan. So they're the 2 exceptions to that rule. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ also commanded to not continue the fast throughout the night. Naha anil wisal, which is known as wisal. He said, do not continue the fast throughout the night. When it's iftar time, you should have your food, break the fast, and not continue it until the night. Not continue it until the night. And this again, and these examples are repeated over and over again in the religion. This shows once again that doing more or doing that which is harder is not necessarily correct. And doing that which is more difficult does not necessarily mean that it's more rewardable or closer to the Sunnah. That's really important to keep in mind. Not always is the harder thing the better thing. Some people feel embarrassed to do the easier thing, and they think that that's a deficiency in the religion, or that's a weakness in Islam. No, it's not. And some people look down on another person because he takes with an easier option. And that's a mistake. That's a big mistake. Aisha radiallahu anha says, مَا خُيِّرَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بَيْنَ أَمْرَيْنِ. If the Prophet ﷺ was given the option between two things, he was given an option of two things, إِلَّا اخْتَارَ أَيْسَرَهُمَا. He would always choose the easy option. مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ إِثْمًا. So long as it's not a sin. So long as it's not a sin. Some people don't act upon this hadith altogether, and they go for the harder option all the time. And some people only act upon the first part of the hadith, which is the Prophet ﷺ would always take the easier option. But they leave the second part of the hadith, which is مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ إِثْمًا, so long as it's not a sin. فَكَانَ أَبْعَدَ النَّاسِ عَنِ الْإِثْمِ. And he would be the furthest people away from sin. So if something is clearly haram, then yes, that's a boundary set by Allah Ta'ala, and we keep away from that. If it's not, then it's good to be easy, and even more important to be easy on other people, and even more important to be easy on people who are younger, and maybe at a certain level of iman and practice of their faith. That's very important. It's very, very important. And we've mentioned over and over again that the Prophet ﷺ would treat his companions differently. Those who were new to Islam, and maybe those who were Bedouins and so on, he gave them limited number of teachings and commands. Those companions who were with him for a long time, he was a bit stricter with them and required higher standards from them. And that's how the deen should be practiced. Okay, now one thing I just wanted to point out or note, and that is, in our time, and this has always been the case, but it seems like it's more of a problem today. There are many various opinions in fiqh. Many opinions when it comes to halal and haram. Is this correct? Is this incorrect? Is this permissible? Is this not permissible? Does this break the fast? Does this not break the fast? Is this valid? Is this not valid? Many different opinions, and different opinions have existed throughout the history of Islam. The issue today is that we have access to all those opinions. That's what makes it more confusing. Before, opinions existed, but primarily people acted upon one madhab, one school of fiqh, one approach. They had their local scholars, and that's it. The scholars of Mecca don't know what the scholars of Andalus are talking about. The scholars of Iraq don't know what's going on in Medina, generally speaking. Not the scholars, the people. The people of Iraq don't know what the scholars of Medina are talking about, and their rulings and their opinions, because they have the scholars of Iraq to give them fatwa, to give them rulings. So things were more stable, especially since the country was ruled according to one school, Islamic law, one school in Islamic law, and there was one approach. So there was a lot more ease at that time. Now, a person could be living in Europe, in the US, in Najd, in North Africa, in India, wherever they are, and they are aware of all the different opinions that exist. They can be valid opinions, invalid opinions, in a madhab, outside a madhab, based on evidence, based on no evidence. People are aware of so many different views. And that causes a confusion a lot of the times for people. And it should first be known that difference in opinion is not haram. And difference of opinion is not wrong. Difference of opinion is not wrong. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz radiallahu anhu, one of the tabi'een, one of the imams of the tabi'een, said, I wouldn't like that the companions agreed on everything. I wouldn't want that. I'm glad that the companions disagreed, because that gives people a lot more scope. I'm happy the companions of the Prophet ﷺ disagreed, because that gives them more scope. And in Al-Bukhari, and maybe in Sahih Muslim as well, the Prophet ﷺ commanded the companions when they were on a journey. He said to them, don't pray until you get to, do not pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. Don't pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. Some companions, when time for Asr came, they prayed Asr and continued the journey. They said, it's time for Asr, we're not going to leave it to time, we're going to pray now. Other companions said, no. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't pray until you get to Bani Qurayza, a place. So he commanded that we don't pray until we get there. So we're not going to pray till we get there, even if we get there after Fajr. We're not going to pray Asr till we get there, even if it's after Fajr. So they differed on how to understand the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, even though they are with the Prophet ﷺ, with him, and they heard him say it. So they're aware of the context of what he's saying. And still they disagreed. When the Prophet ﷺ found out that some of the companions prayed on the way, and some of the companions didn't pray till they got there, he didn't have a problem with either of them. لم يعنف على هؤلاء ولا هؤلاء. He didn't have an issue with these lot, and he didn't have an issue with those lot. Why? Because both of them understood his command in an acceptable way. Both understood his command in an acceptable way. So not every difference in the Sharia is wrong. Some differing is unacceptable. Like differing on the 5 pillars of Islam, like differing on the pillars of Iman, like differing on Tawheed and Shirk. There's no room for difference on these types of things, because these things are from the usul of the deen. These are the things that make up our religion. The things that are clear cut, there's no scope for differing. And so if somebody was to say, we pray 3 times a day, or we change Jumu'ah to Sunday because Sunday is a holiday for us, or we say that alcohol is permissible so long as it doesn't, so long as it doesn't cause you to harm other people and so on, we say that's unacceptable. That's an unacceptable difference. Why? Because it contradicts the clear texts of the Sharia. So it's unacceptable. But where there is scope, there's no harm. There's no harm, alhamdulillah. And the role of the scholars is to find that which is the opinion that is closest to the words of the Quran, the Book of Allah, and the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. Just as that's the responsibility of the scholar, our responsibility is to find that which is an acceptable opinion to act upon. Assalamu alaikum, and that's it. There's no more to it than that. We are not required to arrive at the truth that is with Allah. That's impossible. We are not expected to know exactly what does Allah want. Because how are we going to know? Except through revelation. We are required to find out what is best according to the best of our ability. According to the best of our ability. And that's why Shafi'i says, Rahimahullah, قَوْلِي صَوَابٌ يَحْتَمِلُ الْخَطَأ. My opinion is correct, but potentially incorrect. There's scope, because it's not a clear-cut issue. There is ihtimal, there is potential for error. وَقَوْلُكَ خَطَأٌ يَحْتَمِلُ الصَّوَابُ. And your opinion, if you disagree with me, I believe it to be incorrect, but it's potentially correct. Okay? So yes, he follows what he believes to be correct, but he does not dismiss the other position as well. And so, now, people are of different types. Some people are brought up and they follow a particular madhab from the four madhab, like the Hanafi madhab, or the Maliki madhab, or the Shafi'i, or the Hanbali madhab. No problem at all. And the Ummah is agreed that following one of those four madhab is permissible. Following one of those four madhab is permitted. And there's no khilaf on this. And the fuqaha have explicitly said this. Okay, the fuqaha being the scholars of fiqh. So if a person is brought up following Hanafi scholars, for instance, so jazakallah khair, you're following your religion in an acceptable way, alhamdulillah. Does that mean that the Hanafi madhab is the Quran? No. Does it mean that Hanafi madhab is the Sunnah, the ultimate Sunnah? No. Because it's a school made up by scholars. Some of it may be incorrect, or some of it may not be as accurate, but it is acceptable. And there's a difference between something being false and something being acceptable, but potentially incorrect. Very important to distinguish between the two. Very important to distinguish between the two. And so, generally speaking, the Hanafi madhab, of course, all of the Hanafi madhab is based on evidences, without exception. Some of those evidences most scholars may disagree and consider them to be weak evidences or questionable evidences. That's fine. The same applies to the Shafi'i madhab. The same applies to the Hanbali and the Maliki madhab. Imam Ahmad is not Rasulullah. Imam Malik is not Rasulullah. And similarly, the madhab of Shafi'i is not the Quran. And that's really important to keep in mind. So, if a person is following a madhab, that's permissible. Why is it permissible? Because if it's permissible for you to follow one scholar, then of course you can follow a whole school of scholars. A madhab is what? A madhab is not one man. The Hanafi madhab is not made up of Abu Hanifa. The Hanafi madhab is made up of hundreds of scholars. Hundreds. Many of them scholars of ijtihad, from the leading scholars of the ummah, like Muhammad ibn Hassan and Abu Yusuf and Zufar and Ibn Ziyad and others. And those who came after them as well, of course. These are just students of Abu Hanifa. Many of those who came after are imams of the Hanafi madhab as well. Abu Hassan al-Karhi and Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi and Abu Bakr al-Jassas and others. So the point is, if it's permissible for you to follow one trustworthy scholar, should you not be permitted to follow a madhab which is made up of a whole galaxy of scholars? Of course. So that's the first way of doing it. The second way of doing it is to ask a trustworthy scholar whose knowledge and religion you trust, regardless of the school of thought that he's from. And the position that he gives you, you take with, and that's it. That suffices you on the Day of Judgment. That suffices on the Day of Judgment. Or we take what we have today, known as the fiqh councils. Today we have groups of scholars come together, they discuss contemporary issues. They discuss contemporary issues. Things that maybe weren't discussed in enough detail in the past, or things that are more problematic today due to the change of circumstances. These require scholars to discuss them again and to see what the most appropriate solution is for these things. Because that's the role of a mufti. The role of the mufti is to find the Islamic solution to a problem. That's it. What is the Islamic solution to a problem? Life is full of problems and challenges, okay? And the role of a scholar is to provide the most Islamic solution to that problem. So, if we say the fiqh council, al-Majma' al-Fiqhi, for example, which is based in Jeddah, gives a ruling and someone follows that because it's a group of scholars, alhamdulillah. The European Council for Fatwa and Research, which is based in Dublin and is made up of scholars from across the continent, across Europe and outside Europe as well. That's a group of scholars, they discuss issues and they provide rulings on things. So if someone follows their fatwa, jazakallahu khairan. That's important to understand. Because what happens is, a person, and people do this a lot, they ask one shaykh, he gives them an answer. But they want to ask another shaykh as well, the same question. And he gives a different answer. And that causes them to be more confused. Then they ask someone else, oh, but I heard him say this, and he said this, and someone else said this. And that same issue, they are asking about all the time. Every time a visiting shaykh comes, they're asking the same question. A few weeks later, someone else, they see another shaykh, oh mashallah, he looks religious, knowledgeable, let me ask him the same question as well. Why don't you just take one answer and act upon it? Take one answer and act upon it. Are you here to play about or to act upon the religion? The religion can't be turned into a game like this. Okay, we say that difference of opinion is fine, but that doesn't mean we run around and make tawaf with those differences all the time. That's not how the deen should be understood. That's not how the deen should be understood. And so, our role is to follow that which we find trustworthy, either one of the madahib or one of the scholars who's trustworthy and experienced in fiqh and fatwa, or one of the fiqh councils. One of the fiqh councils. And that's it. That's it. if you follow an opinion of a scholar who you trust, and then someone else tells you, no, that's incorrect, do you have to change your opinion? No. You don't have to change your opinion. What if he tells you that opinion is incorrect and this is the evidence? Do you have to change your opinion? No. Still don't have to change your opinion. What if he tells you that opinion is incorrect and I've written a whole book refuting that opinion? Still don't have to change your opinion. Otherwise, no one's ever going to have an opinion. No one's going to have an opinion ever. Every time someone gives us their own view, we have to change our view. Next week someone gives his view, we have to change our view again. No. Alhamdulillah, we don't have to do that. When a person is advanced in knowledge, becomes a scholar in fiqh, becomes experienced and specializes in fiqh and the Quran and Hadith, then no problem. For you, do your research, verify what is stronger, what is not as strong. I don't think I'm convinced by this anymore, so I'm going to change my opinion. No problem. No problem at all. But you don't have to change your view every time you hear something. Because guess what? If you're not specialized in fiqh, one hadith is going to convince you. One statement will convince you. Because your knowledge is restricted to that. That's all that you have. And if another person gives you a response and says, no, but this hadith means this in reality, that's going to convince you as well, because that's all you have at the moment. And so, I mentioned that anyway, we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. But the point is, and the reason for mentioning that is to say, difference of opinion are not a big deal, variety in views are not a big deal, they're not worthy of making a fuss about. What's our role? Our role is to follow a trustworthy person of knowledge or a trustworthy council of scholars, group of scholars, take with that view and act upon it. Act upon it. Then we can actually practice our religion. That's the objective of revelation. Is revelation there just to talk about it or to practice it? To practice it. So if the Quran is there to be acted upon and not just to be spoken about, then what about the words of scholars? The words of scholars aren't there just to be spoken about. Okay, they are understandings of the Quran and Sunnah to be acted upon, so that we know how to act. And that is an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, any comments so far before we move on to the next point? Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
You mentioned if you come to someone that's trustworthy and he gives you his opinion based on what he thinks is correct.
Yeah.
How do you know that person's... What do you mean by trustworthy and how do you know?
Okay, that's a good question. How can a person know whether someone is a trustworthy scholar or not? Sometimes a scholar will give you his view, and sometimes a scholar will not give you his view, but he will pass on the view of other scholars to you. If you trust that this person has spent some years studying the Sharia, and previously, how could you know whether someone's a trustworthy mufti or not? Because the state appoints them. Someone is given the position of mufti. He is the one who gives rulings. If someone wants an issue, he goes to him. Or you go to a judge, an Islamic judge. So that tells you that he's a scholar. Or other students of knowledge and scholars refer back to him. Refer back to him. For example, if a scholar is referring back to another scholar and passes on his rulings, then we know that's acceptable. If you see that the majority of scholars and the majority of students of knowledge who teach fiqh and so on, are referring back to these scholars as references. And they say, and this was the view of this scholar, and this was the fatwa of this scholar, then that shows that that scholar is reliable, because he's being relied upon by people who are either scholars or students of knowledge, senior students of knowledge. And so these are some of the ways of knowing that a person is trustworthy. If you see that a large portion or most of the Muslims trust this person of knowledge, they respect them and their statements and their fatwa and their opinions, and they act according to them, then that's a sign that he's specialized in his field. So obviously there's no black and white, because you don't know what's in someone's heart. Just like you don't know what's in someone's intention, you don't know what the knowledge that he contains in his heart. There's no way of knowing that. But there are signs that tell us whether a person is qualified, unqualified. So that's signs in terms of knowledge. And there are signs in terms of religion as well. Again, you don't know what's in a person's heart, but there are things that indicate that he's has iman, he has taqwa, he takes his religion seriously, he doesn't lie, he's careful with his speech, okay, and so on and so forth. So if a scholar is passing on to you, if someone is passing on to you the rulings of another madhab or another scholar, then that's good. Why? Because you know he's cautious about what he says. He doesn't just talk. Yeah, this is haram. No, it's not allowed. Just like that. You know that he's cautious about what he says, and so he has read up on an issue, or studied an issue, or researched an issue, and he's giving you a summary of his findings. That's one thing. If a scholar is accepted around the world, like the senior scholars that we know today around the world, and I don't wish to mention names, but nonetheless, take it as a general rule, the senior scholars around the world or around the country, then their fatwa can be relied upon even if they don't pass it from another scholar. He tells you this is permissible, for example. He doesn't have to tell you who said this to you, because you trust him enough to give you a ruling from himself. Okay? So anyways, the point is there are guidelines to tell us whether someone's trustworthy or not. These are some of the guidelines. Someone specializes in fiqh, someone has spent years studying fiqh, someone has been teaching fiqh for many years, someone has written books in fiqh. Okay? Someone, when he explains issues, it's obvious when someone knows what they're talking about. Usually, it can be quite clear when someone knows what they're talking about, when someone isn't sure. If someone consistently gives accurate answers that are clear, answers that are based on evidences, you know that that person is reliable, and so on. So you use these things. How do you know whether a doctor is qualified or not? Do you know the knowledge that's in his heart? You don't know the knowledge that's in his heart. If he talks, can me, someone who's not an expert in medicine, can I verify whether he's saying the right thing or not? I don't know. Could be saying something that's right, could be saying something that's absolutely made up. Wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference. But still, we know how to find the right doctor. And still we know how to find the right mechanic. And still we know how to find the right barber. Through what? Through personal experience, through the words of other people. If you hear 10, 15 people praising a mechanic, saying he sorts your car out, mashallah, 10 out of 10. Alhamdulillah. Isn't that a sign that he's qualified? It's a sign he's qualified. If someone's been open for 15, 20 years and people are praising him all the time, isn't that a sign that he knows what he's talking about? Yes, it is. Similarly, if people of knowledge, imams, someone who delivers the khutbah, teachers of fiqh, if 10, 15, 20, 30 of them tell you he's a trustworthy person of knowledge, he's a respectable person of knowledge, his opinions are respectable and should be relied upon, isn't that a sign? It's a sign. So just like we do that with other things, we do the same thing with a scholar. Okay, so that's the case with when it comes to this issue, and that applies to the various issues, like the entry time of Fajr, for example. The entry time of Fajr, when does Fajr enter, and so on, or the issue of does this break the fast or not break the fast, same thing. It applies to those things. Now, when it comes to the night prayer, and we won't take too long inshallah ta'ala because we've already spent some time. When it comes to the night prayer, the night has its virtues throughout the year. Every night has its virtue. And in Ramadan, like we said, reward is multiplied. And Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri says reward is multiplied 1,000 times in Ramadan. And that's not far off. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said that good deeds are multiplied up to 700 times. This is outside Ramadan. Al-hasanatu bi'ashri amthaliha. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, a good deed is multiplied by 10. إلى 700 ضعف, up to 700 times. إلى أضعاف كثيرة, up to more than that. So if that's the case throughout the year, then surely in Ramadan, 1,000 is not a far statement. And this type of statement comes from one of the leading scholars of the Tabi'in, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, says a similar thing as well. So during the night, acts of worship are even more recommended and even more important. Those acts of worship include salah and dhikr and reciting the Quran and so on and so forth. And so the night should be spent in that manner. Salat al-Taraweeh is part of the night worship. It's not the only. Sometimes because we have Salat al-Taraweeh, we think, I've prayed my Taraweeh, that's it. There's nothing else. The whole night is a time of worship. Taraweeh is from that. It's a type of worship. If you pray Taraweeh in the masjid and then you go home, can you pray? Can you still pray? Nafil, ad? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. If you can't make Taraweeh in the masjid, can you pray Taraweeh at home? Yes, you can. You can pray Taraweeh at home. And there's no issue with that at all. If you can only pray part of the prayer in the masjid, but you go early, can you pray at home? Yes, you can. Of course, if you pray in the masjid, it's more of a push. It's more of a push and it's more of an encouragement. At home, maybe we become sloppy and become lazy and change our mind and decide to sleep instead, etc., etc. All sorts of things come up. But in the masjid, it sort of pushes us to continue with our worship to the best of our ability. And if we are unable to stand for a long period of time, then is Taraweeh wajib or mustahab? Is it obligatory or is it recommended? Recommended, it's not obligatory. So if you miss Taraweeh, is that haram? It's not haram. So because it's a recommended prayer, if you can't or you find it tiring to stand for the whole prayer, can you sit down? Yes, you can sit down. Yes, you can sit down. And so instead of saying, I've prayed 2 rak'ahs now, I'm going to take a 10-15 minute break at the back of the masjid, stretch my legs and lie down a bit, etc., and then come back and pray witr, for example. Instead, sit down whilst praying. Sit down whilst praying. Because the Prophet ﷺ encouraged for us to do extra recommended actions so much that he kept reducing for us the burden. Can't stand? Sit down. In Nafil prayer, you want to sit down? Sit down. Okay, Nafil prayer, take a seat. No problem at all. And there are other rulings that apply that are permissible in Nafil prayers. Okay? Some scholars even say in Nafil prayers, you can have a small drink. Now, and this is not an odd opinion, it's the opinion of the Hanbali madhab. Don't act upon it because people are going to look at you and get scared, or they're going to hit you. But it's an opinion, and it's a valid opinion because some of the companions used to act upon that as well. And so why am I saying that? Because this shows that Nafil prayers, things that are recommended, are encouraged, full stop. And so you don't have to do them the same way you do an obligatory prayer. You do them sitting down, you do part of it sitting down, some of it standing, some of it sitting. It's flexible, there's flexibility. But let's do something. Let's do. If we can't do it in full, then we do part of it. Aisha radiallahu anha says, and this is in the Sahihain, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would, when he got slightly older, he would sit down for salah. Then when there are about 30 or 40 verses left of his recitation, he would stand up, recite those verses, and then make a ruku'. Because there is scope on these things. There's scope on these things, and that's really essential to keep in mind. Also, when it comes to the issue of Taraweeh, of course, it's important to distinguish between that which is obligatory and that which is recommended. What's more important than praying Taraweeh is to not harm our brothers and sisters. That's more important. And to not harm our neighbours. So, many masajid, as you probably have heard previously, have complaints and receive complaints that the congregation is too loud. Outside the masjid, it's like a party is going on. After Taraweeh, people are talking and raising their voices, etc. And it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, people are asleep, people have got work the next day, children have got school the next day. Harming those neighbours is prohibited. It's not allowed. Praying Taraweeh is mustahab. And leaving it is not prohibited. So it's better for you to stay at home than to harm people. Similarly, praying salah in the first row is mustahab, it's recommended. It's a good sunnah, something that we should try to achieve. But harming people is not permissible. And when I say it's not permissible, I'm not saying it from myself. The fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh have explicitly said this in their books. Shaykh Mansour rahimahullah says it in Sharh al-Muntaha and Kashaf al-Qina' and other books. They say it is haram to lean into the person who you're praying next to, such as when you're doing tawarruk. You know, in the final tashahhud, you sit on your buttocks and you put your left leg to the side, according to some scholars anyway. He says that's not permitted if you're going to irritate the person next to you. Not permitted. Not just disliked or better avoided, it's not permitted. Why? Because you're harming the person next to you. Similarly, if you can see that the front row is full, you can't fit into 3 centimeters. 3 centimeters does not fit a normal person. So if a person tries to fit in there, thinking that he's going to get more reward, guess what? You're going to be sinful. Forget reward, you're sinful. And I attended one of the masajid either last year or a few years ago, and the whole row is facing this way. Because people have decided to squeeze in, and instead of people facing the front normally, everyone ended up facing this way, to the side. Because people have squeezed each other in so much that people can't stand straight. And so that's a big problem. As similar to that is to leave your belongings from Asr all the way till Isha. Leave the whole cupboard is there, and goes, iftar, spends time with family, relaxes and so on. 5 minutes before the iqamah, he, what's the thing called, hurdles, hurdles over everyone, gets to the front row and says, brothers, this is my space. No, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Okay, if someone has a spot, goes to make wudu, goes to use the bathroom, etc., for a reasonable period of time, okay, that's acceptable. And you're deserving of that spot. And the Prophet ﷺ explicitly said so. Okay, you're deserving of that spot. But not in a way that harms people. Not in a way that harms people. And so that's something these are things to keep in mind, because obviously whenever there is a large congregation and people are spending an hour and a half, 2 hours together, and it's tight and so on, that can cause people to do things that irritate. If you think something's a problem, someone else is causing a problem, take a step back for the better, for the overall good, for the overall maslahah. Someone squeezes into the first row when they shouldn't be. If you take a step back in order to not cause a problem, then your reward is higher. Because the religion has to be understood in an appropriate way. Our religion is not an aggressive, ruthless religion of yes, front row this, pray this, do that. That's not how religion works. Our religion is supposed to be acted upon in a balanced way, in a reasonable way, in a way that fits people. And so these are things to keep in mind. And there's plenty to say. And the final thing that I will say, inshallah, before we end is, of course, as you know, performing i'tikaf is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in the last 10 days. In the last 10 days, to stay in the masjid is recommended. However, there is no harm in performing i'tikaf for a short period of time. No harm. If you wanted to sit inside the masjid from dhuhr till asr, reciting the Quran, making dhikr, praying and so on, and you intend i'tikaf in that time, that counts as a valid i'tikaf. I'tikaf doesn't have to be in the last 10 days. Because the Prophet ﷺ made i'tikaf in Shawwal. He made i'tikaf in Shawwal as well. And Umar radiallahu anhu said to the Prophet ﷺ, in Jahiliyyah, before Islam, I made a nadhr, I took an oath that I would make i'tikaf for one night. One night. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Awfi bin nadrik. So then do it. Make i'tikaf for one night. So it didn't have to be 10 days for your i'tikaf to be valid. Let's say you're working 5 days. Make i'tikaf for 5 days. Or make i'tikaf, go for work and come back. There's no harm. There's no harm. There is no harm in performing i'tikaf, leaving. Of course, the more you stay in the masjid, the better. Some people might take that as a flexible thing. Oh, let's go out shopping for a bit today then, etc. That's up to you. That's down to you. Of course, that means the reward is not going to be the same, but that's completely up to you. That's not the intention of what I'm saying. The intention is to say, if I am unable to do this, that doesn't mean I can't do this. If I'm unable to do 10 days in full, doesn't mean I can't do 5 days. It doesn't mean I can't do part-time 10 days, in and out, because of work or because of an exam or because of whatever it is. There's no harm. And even before the last 10 days of Ramadan, I can make i'tikaf during the first 20 days of Ramadan, after Fajr, after Dhuhr, whatever it is. There's no harm and there's no issue. And the Hanabila, Imam Ahmad, and the Shafi'i scholars have explicitly said this. They have said that you can make i'tikaf for even a short period of time, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, etc. Okay? And so, again, that's another good deed, another act of worship that is worthy of keeping in mind. And the more we spend time in the masjid, the safer we will be, the better we are. Because at home, we all know that at home things are distracting. So whenever there's a chance to stay in the masjid, it's worth taking advantage of. The masjid is a barakah. Masjid. No one's going to listen to music in the masjid. No one's going to commit sin in the masjid. Usually not. Unless it's things like backbiting and so on. Which also, obviously, we should be careful of. But the point is, being in the masjid stops us from doing other wrongs. Being in the masjid stops us from wasting time. Being in the masjid stops us from doing a lot of other sins. And for as much as we can, spending time in the masjid is a barakah. And when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ even made i'tikaf after him. So the wives of the Prophet ﷺ made i'tikaf. So that means i'tikaf is not even restricted to the men. I'tikaf is valid and permitted for the women also. And we'll leave it at that, inshaAllah ta'ala. Obviously, Ramadan, the advice that we can talk about and the things that we can say, you've heard before, and there's plenty to say. And now it's just about preparation, because we're only a few days away now. Only a few days away, less than a week. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to start off Ramadan in a strong way, and that He accepts our good deeds from us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He overlooks our sins and He makes Ramadan an opportunity for us to make up for the time that we've wasted throughout the rest of the year and the time that we've misspent. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. If anyone wants to make a comment or something, you're welcome. Otherwise, we will conclude there, inshallah. Yeah.
You mentioned that the Nabi Sallallahu he prohibited the people from doing Wisal. What reason did the scholars, because some scholars in the past did actually do it, what reason did they give?
First of all, so he's saying the Prophet ﷺ prohibited Wisal, which means to continue your fast from Maghrib all the way beyond. If we say prohibit does not always necessarily mean something is haram. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from standing whilst drinking. Prohibited meaning He commanded us not to do it. But to drink while standing is not haram. And there's almost an ijma', a consensus on that. The Prophet ﷺ also commanded to not drink with the left hand. And the majority of scholars consider that drinking with the left hand is disliked. And so the word prohibited does not necessarily mean that it's haram automatically. But it means He commanded not to do something. Could be haram, could not be haram. The Prophet ﷺ told the companions to not perform wisal, to connect their fast with the following day. But He Himself performed wisal. So when the companions said to Him, إِنَّكَ تُوَاسِلْ, you yourself do it. قَالَ إِنِّي لَسْتُ كَهَيْئَتِكُمْ إِنِّي يَبِيتُ يُطْعِمُنِي رَبِّي وَيَسْقِينِ. I'm not like you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for me. Then He said to them, and this is also in the Sahihain, قَالَ فَأَيُّكُمْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يُوَاصِلْ فَلْيُوَاصِلْ إِلَى السَّحَرِ. If one of you does want to continue their fast, connect their fast. What does connecting the fast mean? It means you don't have iftar, you're not having food. Maghrib comes, you don't stop your fast, you carry on fasting till the night, or maybe 2 days in a row without eating or drinking anything. That's what wisal is. Yeah? The Prophet ﷺ told the companions not to do that. And he said to them, whoever wants to do it, then do it until sahar. Do it until suhoor. Okay? Some of the companions would do that. They would perform their fast and they wouldn't eat it during Maghrib, but they would continue all the way until before Fajr. Some companions did that. So that's the position of some scholars. Other companions fasted the whole day and continued until the next day. So they performed wisal beyond the time given by the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because they say the Prophet ﷺ only prevented us from doing it out of hardship. As for me, I'm able to do it. As for me, I'm able to do it. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ also said that we should not recite the Quran in less than 3 days. And anyone who recites the Quran in less than 3 days will not comprehend the Quran. That's what he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Anyone who recites the Quran in less than 3 won't comprehend it. Yet, Al-Bukhari would recite the Quran, in Ramadan in particular, in 1 day. All of it. Malik, similar. Al-Shafi'i, similarly. Some scholars would recite the whole Quran twice a day. Once in the day, once in the night. In Ramadan. Are they opposing this statement? No, not necessarily. Well, certainly not. Certainly not. Why? Because they see that the Prophet ﷺ gave a general command, a general piece of advice for a specific reason. Someone who recites the Quran every single day, do you think it's difficult for him to read the whole Quran in 1 day? No. It won't be as difficult. It won't be problematic. And similarly, the one who fasts on a regular basis, if he occasionally performs wisal from this day to the next day, can he cope? He'll be able to cope. So because those companions saw, only a few companions, the majority of scholars say you shouldn't perform wisal, by the way. When I'm explaining this issue, I'm explaining their viewpoint. I'm not saying that this is the established approach and established position and that this is what people should act upon. No. The majority of scholars say wisal is makruh, it's disliked. You should not attach your fast with the next day. You should break your fast. At Maghrib time, you break your fast. But I'm saying that those scholars who did do wisal, this is their understanding, this is their approach and their reasoning. They saw that the Prophet ﷺ did not allow it for the one who is harmed or the one who's unable to keep to it. And so because of that, he prevented them from doing so. Now,
one of the sisters asking if a person cannot fast because they're diabetic, can they still perform etiquette?
Now, so if they are unable to fast because they are diabetic, can they still perform i'tikaf? The answer is yes, because i'tikaf does not require a person to fast. I'tikaf does not require a person to fast. And like I said to you earlier, Umar said to the Prophet ﷺ, O Messenger of Allah, I made an oath that I'm going to fast for a night. A night. Do you fast in the night or do you fast in the day? In the day. So that means Umar performed his i'tikaf when he was not fasting. And so fasting and i'tikaf are two separate acts of worship. Okay, they're two separate acts of worship. Let's say a young 10-year-old or a 12-year-old wants to do i'tikaf with his parent, with his father. But he finds it too difficult to fast. Can he perform i'tikaf? Yes. Yes, he can. Let's say someone is, like in the question, diabetic, or unable to fast, or traveling, for instance, and he doesn't want to fast, or is unable to fast, but wants to perform i'tikaf. Jazakallahu khair. Because fasting is one act of worship, i'tikaf is another act of worship, and if you can't do one, then that doesn't mean you can't do the other. If you can't fast, you can still perform i'tikaf. I'tikaf is open in that regard. جزاكم الله خيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, hopefully there will be some form of program in the masjid during Ramadan. I'm sure there are many programs in the other masajid as well. during Ramadan, which hopefully will be announced either outside on the board or on the online on the Facebook page and so on. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.